My fiancé, on the day he pretended to have amnesia, dragged me to the Civil Affairs Bureau and turned our marriage certificate, which we had just obtained the day before, into a divorce certificate. 2 days later, the wedding I had meticulously prepared proceeded as planned. The groom was still him, but the bride had been replaced by his on-and-off ex-girlfriend. When we met again, his eyes were red as he grabbed my hand. "Vivian, where have you been? Why haven't you come to see me all these days?" I feigned confusion, as if looking at a stranger. "Sir, who are you? Do we know each other?" "Vivian, come to the Civil Affairs Bureau at 9 o'clock to get a divorce." James commanded and hung up without waiting for my response. James is my fiancé. He has amnesia. After losing his memory, the first thing he did was to call me over for a divorce. We got our marriage certificate yesterday morning, and now, early today, it's about to turn into a divorce certificate. When I arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau, I found that James didn't come alone. The woman intimately holding his arm was someone I knew well. I had seen her on James's secret Instagram. Her name is Jessica, his ex-girlfriend with whom he had an on-and-off relationship for 5 years. She seemed to disappear from James's private Instagram only when I appeared. But now that James has amnesia and has forgotten only me, she has returned to his side. Upon seeing me, Jessica's smile turned timid. She stammered, "Miss Vivian, please don't misunderstand. James and I are just..." As she spoke, she didn't let go but held on even tighter. Out of James's sight, she smirked at me. James held her hand tightly, gently kissed her hair, and said firmly, "I asked Jessica to accompany me. There's no misunderstanding, she is my girlfriend." My heart suddenly ached. Meeting Jessica's triumphant gaze, I struggled to force a smile and nodded, "Yes, I understand." There weren't many people getting divorced. When processing the paperwork, the staff gave me a surprised look. I was also surprised because she was the same person who handled our marriage certificate yesterday. She had even congratulated us, "Happy wedding, may you have a harmonious union for 100 years. We thanked her with smiles. Today, we were back, but for a divorce. The person holding James's arm was no longer me, it was Jessica. I stood in front of them, feeling utterly superfluous and embarrassed. The staff looked at the three of us suspiciously and after a while said, "I'm sorry, this doesn't comply with the regulations." James frowned because he couldn't wait any longer. He made just one phone call, and we got the divorce certificate. It was quite ridiculous, the same red booklet, but it no longer had our sweet photo together. Holding the certificate, I tried hard to ignore the burning pain in my chest. Jessica, with an innocent face, casually asked me, "Now that you're divorced, you won't still be staying at James's house, will you?" After asking, she seemed to realize something and quickly added, "Sorry, I know Miss Vivian doesn't have a house. Since you were once a couple, if you want to stay for a few days, James won't disagree." James interrupted her, looking at me without any emotion, "Since we're divorced, you should pack your clothes and move out now." His tone was cold and matter-of-fact, as if he wasn't the one pretending to have amnesia. My throat tightened instantly. The bright red divorce certificate caught my eye. He pretended to have amnesia just for this, didn't he? Why bother? I've never been the type to cling desperately. If he wanted a divorce, why would I hold on to a man who doesn't love me? It's just laughable that 5 years of relationship couldn't earn me a straightforward explanation. A marriage ended in such an absurd way. I took a deep breath and forced a stiff smile. "All right, as you wish." The car James drove was the wedding car we had chosen together. When we bought it, James said to me, "On our wedding day, I'll use this car to bring my Vivian home." The car was picked up just yesterday afternoon, and I hadn't even sat in it yet. Now, sitting in the passenger seat was Jessica. It had become a testament to their love. James leaned over to buckle Jessica's seatbelt intimately. They were very close, their breaths mingling. As James straightened up, Jessica gave him a sweet kiss on the cheek. Instinctively, James glanced at me. Jessica followed James's gaze and saw me, displeased. "Sorry, this is the car James gave me, exclusively for me. I don't want any other woman sitting in it." James looked at her dotingly, "Of course. How could I let others sit in the car I gave you? With that, James drove off with Jessica, leaving me in a cloud of exhaust fumes. My nose tingled, and a tear finally fell, rolling into the dust on the ground and disappearing. I hurriedly hailed a cab and rushed back, only to find the villa's gate tightly closed. My luggage was thrown outside on the ground, mixed with the rain from last night, covered in mud and dirt. After knocking for a while, the villa's aunt opened the door. She looked awkward. These were thrown out on Miss Jessica's orders. Jessica's voice came from inside. Oh? Are these your things? Sorry, I thought they were trash someone didn't want, so I had them thrown out. I didn't mean to. Miss Vivian won't be angry, right? Jessica came out in her pajamas, deliberately exposing the hickeys on her neck. I pretended not to see and just tugged at the corner of my mouth. Miss Jessica's upbringing is truly concerning. A rebuke came from inside the house. Vivian, don't push it. Jessica has apologized to you. What more do you want? Looking over, James walked to Jessica's side, his face cold as ice, staring at me. His gaze swept over the scattered items on the ground, sneering, just this junk, and you treasure it so much. My throat choked, my heart suddenly clenched tightly, unable to say a word. He urged impatiently, hurry up and pack your things and leave, or I'll have the cleaners take them away. I tried hard to suppress the tears in my eyes and nodded, okay. Also, I don't want to see you here again. Jessica will misunderstand, and I can't let my wife be upset. As he spoke, he hugged Jessica, and they affectionately ignored everyone else. My fingers almost dug into my palms. Swallowing the bitterness in my throat, I silently packed my belongings. Although I hadn't lived here long, I had a lot of stuff. It filled 2 suitcases completely. Actually, this villa was supposed to be James and my marital home. The meticulous renovation design, the comfortable and elegant furniture, all were designed and arranged by me personally. It was full of my aspirations because this was to be the home where James and I would spend the rest of our lives together. But now, the house remains the same, but the person living in it is no longer me. Things remain, but people change. I walked out with 2 suitcases. Jessica took a deep breath. Without this trash, the air feels fresher. Hearing this, James instructed, "Aunt, have someone clean the house thoroughly, and if there are any more of her things, throw them all in the trash." I stopped in my tracks. The wind blew across my face, and the tears in my eyes had somehow dried completely. I turned around and smiled at Jessica. "The trash I don't want is yours now." I rented an apartment near my studio. I used to think the rent was too high and couldn't bear it. I saved all my money to focus on my career. Because being with James, I always feared the gap between us was too big. Although, as an ordinary person, I was indeed worlds apart from James. Now, I've fallen from the clouds back to my muddy ground. Yet, I feel exceptionally relieved. I lay in bed for 24 hours, dazed. Until I received a call from my partner. "Vivian, there's an important wedding tomorrow." I'm a wedding planner, and I run a wedding planning company with a friend. The wedding originally scheduled for tomorrow was supposed to be mine and James's, which I had spent 3 months designing and preparing. Now, this wedding hasn't even started, and it has become my illusion. When I heard those familiar words on the phone, my heart skipped a beat. I asked tremblingly, "Who are the bride and groom?" James and Jessica's names drilled into my ears. My head buzzed. I can't possibly go and officiate their wedding. My partner's apprehensive voice came through. "Vivian, they specifically asked for you. You know, if you don't go, our studio." With just one word from James, I could be left with nowhere to go in this city. After hanging up, I collapsed on the bed. James was targeting me. He insisted that I plan his wedding. They were provoking me, and I had no way to avoid it. I quickly tidied myself up and hurried to the wedding venue. What met my eyes was the breathtaking lavender field in the estate. The light breeze made the lavender sway like purple waves. Initially, I chose this venue because I love lavender the most. I hoped that on the most important day of my life, I could walk hand in hand with the person I love the most in a sea of lavender for the rest of our lives. But now, seeing this flower see again, my heart only felt sour. I suppressed the sourness and professionally discussed the wedding details with Jessica. She had many complaints, constantly pointing and asking for changes. James sat patiently by her side, his hand around her waist, showing no impatience. Just a few days ago, he held me in his arms like this, listening patiently as I planned our wedding. After tormenting me for half a day, Jessica said, "Forget it, let's stick to the original plan." After all, Miss Vivian is most familiar with the original plan, and I trust her with it. I looked at the densely packed notes on my tablet, my fingers clenching tightly. The original plan she mentioned was actually the one I had for my own wedding. James knew that too. Jessica looked at my silent expression and smiled contentedly. She said lightly, "The wedding will be held tomorrow morning. Although it's a bit rushed, I believe Miss Vivian can make it perfect, right?" I was stunned for a moment. My wedding with James was also originally planned for tomorrow morning. I looked up and met Jessica's triumphant gaze. The wedding I had meticulously planned for a month was now Jessica's. It was disgusting and nauseating. After a long silence, I squeezed out a yes from my throat. Jessica snuggled up to James, her smile hiding a knife. "James, Miss Vivian has helped us a lot. We should give her a big red envelope at the wedding." James said indifferently, "This is what she's supposed to do. Otherwise, why would I pay her?" Hearing this, Jessica smiled even more smugly. I pursed my lips, closed my eyes, and said, "Yes, Miss Jessica is right. You two are my clients, and this is what I should do." I stayed up all night. The wedding proceeded as scheduled at 10 a.m. today. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I felt a warmth below. My period had come early. The dizziness from blood loss and staying up all night made me almost unable to stand. But someone suddenly supported my body. I opened my eyes, it was James. Instinctively, I pushed him away. A flash of surprise crossed his face, then it turned cold. "What are you standing here for? Not going to help? Do you want to be the bride?" I tugged at the corner of my mouth. Money is hard to earn, and shit is hard to eat. I had no energy to argue with him. I silently turned to leave, but someone called me. Jessica, wearing a gorgeous and dreamy purple wedding dress, walked over, her slim waist accentuated, standing tall and graceful. My gaze inevitably fell on her wedding dress. This dress was originally chosen by James for me. Now, it was worn by Jessica. My fingers unconsciously dug into my palm, the pain pulling at the tense string in my mind. Jessica twirled proudly in front of me. Her face wore a hypocritical smile. "Miss Vivian, do you think this wedding dress looks good? Does it match today's setting?" I couldn't speak, just nodded haphazardly. Her smile grew wider, her gaze lingering on me. "I wonder if Miss Vivian could be our wedding officiant?" The string in my mind suddenly snapped. I looked up, my eyes blazing. James seemed pleased with my reaction and commanded, "Did you hear that? Jessica wants you to officiate the wedding. It's an honor for you." A sarcastic smile appeared on my lips. "What if I say no?" James looked at me coolly. "Then I'll have to assume Miss Vivian is incapable, and I don't think such a company needs to exist anymore." I bit my tongue, the taste of blood filling my mouth, pushing down the lump in my throat. How humiliating. Couldn't we part on good terms? I've never been one to cling desperately. Even without today's anger, I would still have kept my distance from them. Why did they have to humiliate me like this? Numbly, I nodded. I walked past them with unsteady steps. As I passed Jessica, I paused slightly and whispered, "Miss Jessica, second-hand goods don't suit you. The chest is too loose, and the waist is too tight." Without looking at Jessica's instantly darkened face, I hurried away. The wedding officially began. Sunlight fell into the lavender field, dreamlike. Jessica, in her beautiful purple wedding dress, slowly walked into the sea of lavender. Amid thunderous applause, she placed her hand in James's palm. I thought I was numb, but my eyes were uncontrollably moist. I had imagined this wedding countless times in my mind and spent 3 months making it a reality. But the bride wasn't me. My soul seemed split in two, one aching in the flower sea, the other numbly reciting the lines I had memorized so many times. I don't even remember how the wedding ended. I just walked back to my rental apartment like a wandering soul, my heels worn out from the journey. As soon as I lay down, I fell into a deep, dazed sleep. In my dream, everything was fragmented, flashing before my eyes like a carousel, shattering and taking away our 5 years together, leaving no ripples. I slept for 3 days. When I woke up, I was starving and ordered takeout. That's when I saw the wilted lavender on the windowsill. The language of lavender is waiting for your love. I think I don't need it anymore. Strangely, the past with James seemed to have completely become the past after these 3 days and nights of darkness. Even when I think about it, it's like flowers in a mirror or the moon in water, blurred through the dream, as if from another lifetime. I touched my chest, my heart was beating strongly. It no longer hurt. I blocked James. Since he wanted to pretend to have amnesia, I hoped he could pretend thoroughly. It's best if we remain strangers for the rest of our lives. Perhaps it's because of the setback in love that my career flourished. Our business expanded nationwide. I started traveling frequently for work. When I returned from my last business trip, it was already a month later. As I walked out of the company, there was a Maybach parked by the roadside. A man was leaning against the car door, smoking, with a pile of cigarette butts beside him. He seemed to have been waiting for a long time. When he saw me, he rushed forward. Through the smoke, I saw his face clearly. It was James. I frowned instinctively, but before I could avoid him, he grabbed my wrist. His eyes were red as he looked at me, as if I had done something wrong. "Vivian, where have you been? Why haven't you come to see me?" I sneered inwardly, but when I looked up, I feigned confusion and wariness, as if looking at a stranger. "Sir, who are you? Do we know each other?" James froze, his face full of shock. He anxiously tightened his grip. "Vivian, what are you talking about? How can you pretend not to know me?" Pain shot through my wrist. I frowned, my eyes cold. "Sir, please let go. This is harassment. If you don't, I'll call the police." James didn't let go. His gaze fell on my face. Seeing the strangeness in my eyes, his face was filled with panic and unease. He trembled. "Vivian, I'm James, I'm your husband." I didn't believe him. In the struggle, I bit him hard. He winced in pain but still didn't let go. I shouted, "Help!" He tried to cover my mouth, but it was too late. Passers-by gathered around. He explained in a panic, "I'm her husband, she's just mad at me." I pulled his hand down and cried, "He's lying, I don't know him." Seeing this, the onlookers suspiciously held James down. Some kind-hearted people called the police. The police car took us to the station. James was my husband. Once. Now, he's just my ex-husband. The dates on the marriage and divorce certificates were only a day apart. Our marriage didn't even last 24 hours. After everything was cleared up, the police looked at James with indescribable expressions. After a severe reprimand, James was released. At the police station entrance, James's gaze was fixed on me. He asked hoarsely, "Vivian, don't you recognize me anymore?" I stepped back in disgust and said indifferently, "A month ago, I had a serious illness and lost many memories. Should I remember you? Since I forgot, it must not be important." Hearing this, James looked hurt. He opened his mouth to say something. I cut him off. "I heard you're my ex-husband. Since you're my ex, I don't think we need to have any contact." James's expression turned to panic. "Vivian, let me explain." Jessica's voice interrupted, "James." Looking over, Jessica hurried over, her eyes full of hostility towards me. She possessively took James's arm and questioned, "Why are you here?" I sneered, "Are you James's wife? You should ask your husband properly instead of questioning me, an innocent person." Jessica looked suspicious but pretended to be certain James wouldn't do anything wrong. James, unusually, shook off Jessica's hand. His gaze never left me. He took a step forward but stopped as if pierced by my wary look. He explained hoarsely, "Vivian, she's not my wife. I've never married her. You're my only wife." Hearing this, Jessica's face turned completely dark. She anxiously grabbed James's hand, her tone urgent. "James, let's go home, okay?" James reflexively pushed her away. Jessica fell to the ground, letting out a cry of pain. She cried pitifully, "James, it hurts." But this still didn't catch James's attention. James's gaze was fixed on me. His voice even carried a pitiful tone. "Vivian, listen to me. I had amnesia before, so I was deceived into divorcing you, but now I remember everything." I interrupted him impatiently. "I don't care. Please don't bother me." I turned and left impatiently. James wanted to follow, but I threatened lightly, "This is a police station. Do you want to go back in?" He stopped. I left without looking back. Behind me was the sound of Jessica and James arguing fiercely. It had nothing to do with me. But James started to pester me relentlessly. He somehow found out the address of my rental apartment and waited pitifully outside my door every day. As soon as I opened the door, I saw his face, and immediately frowned in disgust. A flash of hurt crossed his eyes. Yet, he persistently handed me the breakfast he was holding. It was my favorite custard buns and preserved egg and lean meat porridge. From the packaging, it was from my favorite shop, which was far from my apartment. But when he handed it to me, the breakfast was still steaming hot. I pushed his hand away impatiently. The breakfast fell to the ground. The buns rolled, covered in dust. The porridge spilled all over, splashing on my pants. I was instantly furious. "Early in the morning, can't you stop causing me trouble? So annoying." He looked at me with a hurt expression. A small amount of porridge spilled onto his hand, burning it red. He humbly said, "Vivian, I'm sorry." I didn't want to hear his explanation and slammed the door shut. I changed my clothes and ignored James standing outside. He followed me like a begging dog, only to be sprayed with exhaust fumes from my car. At noon, he persistently sent flowers and lunch through delivery. I refused them all. The delivery guy helplessly called him several times. Finally, he had to leave the flowers and lunch at the company entrance. It was hot, and the lunch left out all afternoon emitted a sour smell. I pinched my nose and threw the spoiled lunch and the flowers tainted with the smell into the trash. When I looked up, I met his hurt gaze. I frowned tightly and scolded, "Why do you always cause trouble for others?" James pursed his lips, his eyes clouded with gloom. I rubbed my temples in headache and said discontentedly, "James, what's the point of doing all this? I don't remember you, and I don't want to remember you. Can you stop disturbing my life?" James's face turned pale instantly. He stood there silently, his eyes filled with indescribable sadness. After a while, he choked out, "Vivian, can you give me a chance? A chance to awaken your memories. I've had amnesia too, I know how to awaken your memories." I interrupted him quietly, "You've lost your memory, and I've lost my memory too. It just so happens that we don't owe each other anything. There's no need to restore our memories." James choked, his face showing numb pain. "Vivian, are you still blaming me? I was deceived by Jessica into divorcing you. Can you forgive?" I interrupted impatiently, "It doesn't matter. I don't care." His voice stopped abruptly. His breathing became rapid and irregular, as if the pain in his heart was unbearable. After a long silence, he said hoarsely, "Vivian, you weren't like this before. As a wedding planner, I've encountered all sorts of troubles, big and small. So, in front of James, I always kept my emotions stable. The only time I lost control was when James claimed he had amnesia and wanted to divorce me. I knew he was pretending. It was his trick to toy with me. But I still lost control." I clearly saw a flash of satisfaction in James's eyes. He was pleased with my loss of control for him. It seemed that only if I was humble and lowly enough could I prove my love for him. How ridiculous. Is he still a schoolboy? Testing a girl's love by humiliating her? This isn't love, it's blatant mockery. He doesn't deserve my forgiveness. I rejected James time and time again. But he still tirelessly appeared before me. Every time I trampled on his intentions, his face would show indescribable sadness. Yet, the next day, he would still grovel to please me. One late night, I was watching food videos and got cravings, so I posted on Instagram. Caption: I really want to eat this. Half an hour later, there was a knock on my door. James stood at my door, his forehead covered in sweat. He was holding the food I had posted on Instagram. Hearing his breathless panting, I could imagine he must have run to several places in the middle of the night to find what I wanted. But he didn't mention his efforts. He just handed me the food and said humbly, "Vivian, didn't you say you wanted to eat this? I bought it for you." My face didn't show the joy he expected, instead, it showed deeper disgust. I pushed his hand away and grumbled, "Are you doing this on purpose? You know I'm on a diet, yet you bring me high-calorie food late at night. Why do you always make things worse?" I slammed the door in anger. Then, feeling unsatisfied, I opened the door again. James's dejected face instantly brightened, his eyes sparkling. He asked hopefully, "Vivian, are you willing to accept my gesture?" I sneered, "Get lost, and stop stalking my Instagram." I cursed him again. After closing the door, I found his alternate account and blocked him. He couldn't contact me, so he resorted to the old method, squatting near my apartment and company every day. A few times, I heard him answering calls outside my door. Jessica was arguing with him loudly on the phone. His assistant at the company also frequently messaged him to return. He was the company's manager. His frequent absences had stalled many projects, causing significant losses to the company. The shareholders were also critical of him. He was in a dilemma. I thought he would give up. But he didn't. When I opened the door, I still saw him. His face was haggard, with some unshaven stubble on his chin. Upon closer look, his eyes were slightly red. I had called the police before. He was detained for a few days, but upon release, he remained unchanged. I sneered, "A dignified CEO of a listed company, willing to bear the crime of harassment. How lowly can you be?" James clenched his teeth, his jawline tight. He silently expressed his persistence. But I was tired of this boring game. I crossed my arms and looked down at him. "Tell me, what will it take for you to give up?" Hearing this, James stood up straight, his eyes brightening. He was overjoyed. "Vivian, give me a chance to try to restore your memories, okay? Once you remember everything, you'll definitely come back to me." I stared at him meaningfully for a while. "Are you so sure that once I remember everything, I'll change my mind? But whether I have amnesia or not, the fact that you divorced me and had a wedding with Jessica remains. I don't think the me who remembers would forgive you." Faced with my aggression, James instinctively stepped back. His gaze dodged, avoiding eye contact with me. But he spoke firmly, as if to cover his guilt, "Vivian, as long as you remember everything, you'll definitely come back to me." I didn't bother to expose his self-deception and said lightly, "I'll give you a week. If you can't make me change my mind, stop pestering me." James pursed his lips and bargained, "Can it be a month?" I frowned, displeased. "Don't haggle with me. I don't want to waste time on you. You don't have much time left either. If you keep with me, you'll be the one with worries." James gritted his teeth and remained silent. I reached to close the door. He stopped me and agreed, "Okay." Then, he looked at me deeply, his eyes filled with longing and hope. He took my hand and led me to revisit the places in the city where we had left our footprints. Our first encounter was love at first sight for him. Just from a fleeting glance, he schemed to get close to me. Unlike those frivolous rich kids, he didn't rely on money or power to pursue me. He carefully inquired about my likes and found common topics with me. I loved milk tea, sweets, lavender, my favorite games, colors, my aesthetic and values. He knew them all. When chatting with him, I felt we were like-minded and enjoyed our conversations. So, I let my guard down and gradually enjoyed it. He was like a big net, enveloping me completely. By the time I fell in love with him, I had nowhere to escape. In the 3 years we were together, I wasn't unaware that he wasn't as perfect as he seemed at first. But I thought that was normal in a relationship. When you love someone, you keep lowering your and tolerantly accept your lover. But James's nature was worse than I imagined. I listened to him babbling in my ear, telling stories from our past. I just looked at him expressionlessly. He awkwardly averted his gaze, not daring to meet my indifferent eyes. As I listened, I couldn't help but frown. The beautiful memories he spoke of had long been replaced in my heart by the humiliation and degradation he inflicted on me. I couldn't be moved at all. Faced with my indifference, his eyes gradually turned red. He opened the photo album on his phone, explaining the story behind each picture. As he flipped through, suddenly, a photo of him and Jessica appeared. He hurriedly put away his phone, stammering, "Vivian, But I just asked curiously, I heard Jessica is your ex-girlfriend. You were on and off for 3 years. Why didn't you stay with her?" James suddenly fell silent. After a while, he said solemnly, "She's just my past. Vivian, the one I love now is you." I countered, "But when you had amnesia, the only person you forgot was me, and you chose to marry her. That shows I'm not irreplaceable, and she holds an important place in your heart. So, why do you still cling to me? Isn't it good to be with her?" James's lips turned pale for a moment, speechless. I said lightly, "Since you can forget, it means the forgotten isn't important. You are like that, and so am I." I looked straight into his eyes and added, "Moreover, amnesia is never an excuse to humiliate someone." His breath caught, panic spreading from the bottom of his eyes. His lips moved, but his throat seemed mute. After a long time, he said softly, "Vivian, there are still 3 days. I will definitely make you remember our past." I sneered sarcastically and said nothing. On the 4th day, he brought back the blue cat that had been sent to the pet shop for boarding. The blue cat pounced on my feet, rubbing against my hand affectionately, unwilling to leave. I stroked its dull and withered fur, and my body suddenly stiffened. This blue cat was a birthday gift he gave me on my 26th birthday. In a large bouquet of lavender, there was a 3-month-old kitten. The little kitten peeking out from the flowers was so adorable that it melted my heart. He held the flowers and the cat, smiling gently, "Vivian, are you willing to give this little kitten a home?" I touched the kitten's fluffy little head, my voice involuntarily becoming softer. "Little kitten, do you want to come to Auntie's home?" The kitten meowed weakly. Louder than the meow was James's response, "Yes, I do." He squeezed next to me, his voice tinged with laughter, "The kitten still needs a daddy. You don't want him to grow up without a father's company, do you?" I understood what he meant, and my face turned red. I muttered, "In your dreams." But under his persistent pestering, I eventually agreed to live with him. Now, recalling this memory, James's eyes were full of tenderness. I stroked the blue cat nestled on my lap, my expression dazed, my heart calm. I remembered the day I was kicked out by James. What I could take away was what they considered trash. Even though this blue cat was a birthday gift from him to me, nominally mine, I couldn't take it with me. A sarcastic smile appeared on my lips. I stirred my face and accused, "How could you put the cat in lavender? Don't you know lavender is toxic to cats? What if the cat eats it and gets poisoned? Moreover, who gives a living creature as a birthday gift? This is a life, the person who raises it needs to be responsible for its entire life. Or, in your eyes, a cat is nothing, something you can raise or abandon at will?" My series of accusations left James stunned. He looked at me helplessly, opened his mouth, and once again fell silent. I hugged the blue cat in my arms with heartache. The cat was given by James, but I raised it. I had never had a pet before. After researching, I learned that cats shouldn't be exposed to lavender. Since then, I kept lavender away from the cat. But he didn't pay attention. So now, he could still confidently mention this in front of me. Back then, I thought James was just following an online trend to give a cat, so I let it go lightly. But the bullet he fired back then is now hitting him right between the eyes. I lifted my eyelids and questioned, since it's my cat, why did you hide it? James was speechless. I calmly pursued, I had amnesia. Was it my fault? Did I refuse to take care of it? James clenched his fists, regret and struggle seeming to suffocate him. He looked at me helplessly, Vivian, it was my fault. I had amnesia and didn't handle these things well, making you sad. I will never make the same mistake again. I said lightly, amnesia is not an excuse for not taking good care of a cat. I looked away, not wanting to see his defeated expression. I informed him, since it's my cat, I want to take it with me. Upon hearing this, James's face instantly brightened, Vivian, I knew you wouldn't abandon the cat. I interrupted him roughly, draft a contract. You are not allowed to take the cat from me again. The smile on James's lips stiffened. He said painfully, Vivian, why are you being so distant with me? I sneered, let me remind you, Mr. James, from my perspective, you are less than a stranger to me. James stood there stunned, his eyes dimming instantly. James's face grew uglier day by day. On the last day, in the evening, the sky was painted with a splendid sunset. We walked into the lavender field in the estate. The setup was so familiar. Everything here was identical to the wedding a month ago. Only the crowd of guests and the hand-holding bride and groom were missing. We stood in the sea of lavender. The breeze lifted my black hair, and the lavender swayed with it. James gazed at me. In the brilliant sunset, he knelt on one knee before me. In his open palm was a familiar wedding ring. 2 months ago, that ring was on my finger. But on the day he married Jessica, in this same flower sea, he put this ring on Jessica's middle finger. His figure overlapped with that of the groom at the wedding. He said softly, Vivian, we once planned together that our wedding would be held grandly in this lavender field. I would hold your hand, and in front of everyone, we would promise to stay together forever. He looked at me steadily, his eyes seemingly full of unwavering affection. Vivian, will you marry me? I laughed in anger and slapped him across the face. I cursed, do you think I'm Jessica, willing to take any second-hand goods? He was stunned by my slap, his right cheek swelling up. I turned and left in a huff. I didn't want to stay in this awful place any longer. After a moment of daze, he hurriedly chased after me. I stopped and said coldly, enough. It's the last day. Don't pester me anymore. He grabbed my wrist in panic. His eyes were red, and he looked pitiful. Vivian, just one last place with me, okay? I tugged at my wrist impatiently. He didn't let go, his eyes full of humility, just this last time. I sighed helplessly, fine. When the car stopped, in front of us was a familiar villa. He hesitated, Vivian, do you remember? This is our home. Home? 3 months ago, I was shamefully driven out of here. I said firmly, this is not my home. James's expression turned desolate for a moment. He instinctively tried to hold my hand, but I deliberately avoided it. I said coldly, Mr. James, mind your manners. He pursed his lips and said nothing. In the standoff, the door was pushed open from inside the villa. Jessica's hair was disheveled, and she looked haggard. But when she saw James, tears welled up in her eyes. She excitedly hugged James. James, you're finally back. Do you know how long I've been waiting for you at home? You bad guy, I'm pregnant, 3 months along. You're going to be a father. James's face darkened instantly. His eyes anxiously looked at me, but his hand instinctively pushed Jessica away forcefully. With a bang, Jessica's body hit the doorframe and fell heavily. Jessica's face turned pale immediately. Her hand was on her slightly protruding belly, pain twisting her features. Fine beads of blood flowed from under her, red and glaring. She sobbed, struggling to reach out to James. James, save our child. But James took a step back. His expression was frozen, and he said coldly, this child shouldn't have existed in the first place. He turned to me, Vivian, don't listen to her nonsense. I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I interrupted, is this the time to say that? Hurry and take her to the hospital. The night became chaotic. Under the hospital's fluorescent lights, Jessica's face was pale without a trace of color. She had lost the child, and her body was injured. It would be much harder for her to get pregnant again, and even if she did, there was a high chance she couldn't keep it. After a while, Jessica moved. She lifted her lifeless eyes and stared at me. It's you. It's all your fault. You caused me to lose my child. It's all your fault. She struggled to get up from the bed and lunge at me. I quickly stepped back. James immediately shielded me. He sternly rebuked, Jessica, have you had enough? Tears streamed down Jessica's face. She glared at James with hatred. James, she caused us to lose our child. I might not be able to get pregnant again, and you still side with her. I pushed James aside and reminded coldly, Miss Jessica, don't make baseless accusations. There's surveillance at the villa entrance that recorded everything clearly. If you've lost your mind, go back and watch the footage carefully. Jessica choked, you. I warned, if you keep slandering me, I'll consider it extortion. I'll file a report at the police station, and if you persist, I can sue you. Jessica's eyes turned red with anger. James rubbed his temples and said indifferently, the child is gone, and it shouldn't have been there in the first place. You're suffering now because of your own actions. Jessica's breath hitched. Hatred burst from her empty eyes. James, I deliberately poked holes in the condom, but if you could control yourself, you wouldn't have slept with me. She turned to me, a slight smile on her lips. Do you know when it was? It was during the month you were preparing for the wedding. He had already cheated. Otherwise, how do you think I got pregnant? James was furious. Shut up. He anxiously explained to me, Vivian, don't believe her. Listen to me. The child in her belly has nothing to do with me. I don't know whose it is, but she insists on pinning it on me. I cut him off. I don't need your explanation. At this moment, my face was calm, as if watching a farce that had nothing to do with me. I said lightly, James, I don't care. Our deal is over. From now on, don't pester me again. I turned and left. James wanted to follow, but Jessica pounced on him and held him down. I didn't look back. Behind me was Jessica's hate-filled wailing, James, are you still human? I hate you. You'll get what's coming to you. James disappeared from my world. I opened a branch in another city. I bought a house and settled down there. Occasionally, while stroking the soft fur of the cat in my arms, I would inadvertently think of James. His life now is not going well. The company's economy is declining, and the shareholders are critical of him. He's overwhelmed with work. The most troublesome thing is that Jessica is clinging to him. After being discharged, Jessica's mental state was unstable. She followed James around all day, muttering, James, how can you like another woman? It's just a breakup. It's not the first time you've broken up with me. After a while, you'll come back to me. She cried, but, James, I've been waiting for you for so long. Why haven't you come to reconcile with me? James was extremely annoyed by her. He had beaten, scolded, and driven her away, but Jessica always managed to cling to him again. Over time, James became increasingly irritable. He lost control and beat Jessica half to death in public. Jessica had a mental illness and was exempt from liability. He was detained in the detention center. The video of him beating her spread online. Netizens condemned him, and everyone was against him. Under the cyberbullying, his past harassment of me was dug up. He once again angered the public. Under the pressure of public opinion, his company's stock plummeted. When he returned to the company, he would face accountability from the shareholders. But now, James had his hands full. He had beaten Jessica into the ICU. Jessica's family held him responsible and sued him. Now, James had only two choices, either lose the lawsuit and go to jail, or take care of Jessica for the rest of his life under the supervision of her family. This matter made a big splash online for a month. When the public opinion died down, James and Jessica secretly got married. He married Jessica, whom he looked down upon. For the rest of his life, he would have to take good care of Jessica, who was sometimes sane and sometimes insane, under the watchful eyes of her family. He would be entangled with Jessica for life. I never thought I would see James again. It was just a coincidence. He saw me, his eyes full of complex emotions. After a while, he called out to me, "Vivian, how are you doing now?" I glanced at James. He was obviously not doing well. His hair had turned white, there were more wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, and his face was filled with a lifeless, depressed air. I heard that he still had shares in the company but no real power. For a man in his prime career phase, this was a significant blow. I raised an eyebrow and ignored him. Before getting into the car, his gaze was still on me, reluctant to look away. I turned back. He was not too far, not too close, enough to hear me clearly. I said lightly, "My amnesia was fake, and I know yours was too. We're even." James's pupils dilated sharply. He wanted to chase after me to question, but Jessica, who appeared out of nowhere, held him back. I got into the car without hesitation and drove away, leaving him with only the exhaust fumes. When I was with James, I learned he had an ex-girlfriend with whom he had an on-and-off relationship for 5 years. It's impossible not to care. He repeatedly assured me that he would never have any contact with Jessica. But during the month I was preparing for the wedding, he reconnected with Jessica. On the morning after getting the marriage certificate, I left hurriedly for work. When I came back early, I heard unbearable sounds coming from the bedroom. It was James and Jessica. It was like a bolt from the blue. I didn't even have the strength to open the door. I didn't expose it. I left James some dignity. Infidelity was my bottom line. I couldn't tolerate it. But for a moment, I couldn't bring myself to say it. But James got greedy. I overheard him calling his friend. He said lightly, "I regret it. I don't want to be tied down by marriage at a young age. Besides, she doesn't seem to love me as much as Jessica does. Jessica can go to extremes for me, but she's different. She's too calm, a bit boring. I want to separate from her for a while. When I figure it out, I'll go find her." Amnesia? If I have amnesia, will she lose control for me? I want to see how far she can go for me.